He threw out his black wife with their newborn twins. In the rain, left her homeless and still recovering from childbirth, with nowhere to go and no one to call. He stood in the doorway with his mistress, Sarah, laughing as Ariana stumbled into the darkness, like she was nothing more than trash he'd finally gotten rid of. She sank onto the curb that night, soaked through, her body aching, her babies crying against her chest. Then, a silent, sleek black car pulled up beside her. Out stepped her cousin, David Mitchell, a man she hadn't seen in over a decade. He was the secret power, the only one who could save her. David simply said, "Get in, cuz. The game is over." What her husband, Robert Campbell, didn't know, what he never even suspected, was that the mansion he just threw her out of, the business he thought he owned, the life he thought he'd stolen, none of it belonged to him. It was all a perfectly laid trap, a fortress of wealth held in the Mitchell Legacy Trust. And in 4 weeks, her billionaire cousin would return with Ariana, and they would shatter everything Robert believed about power, control, and who really owned his entire world. The rain hit like icy needles against Ariana's skin as she stood barefoot on the marble steps. Her newborn twins pressed against her chest. The mansion behind her glowed with a warm, golden light, a cruel contrast to the freezing night. Her dress clung to her body, soaked through, but the cold didn't register. Nothing registered except the weight of her babies and the sound of the door slamming shut. "You are dead weight, Ariana, leave." His voice was flat, mechanical. Robert stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards, his eyes empty. "Robert, please," her voice cracked. "The twins are only 3 days old. Just let us stay until morning. Please." He didn't even flinch. "You heard me. Get out." Behind him, Sarah appeared. She was wearing a silk bathrobe, likely one of Ariana's. Sarah's smile was slow and satisfied. "This is awkward," Sarah said, dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe you should have had a family with more to offer him." Ariana's hands tightened around her babies. One of them whimpered, a tiny sound that cut through the rain. She wanted to scream, but her body was still healing, her stitches pulling with every breath. She had no strength left for anger, only the instinct for survival. "I gave you everything," Ariana whispered. 6 years, Robert. 6 years of my life." Robert stepped forward, his face twisted with contempt. A wife who couldn't bring in a single real connection. A family that offered nothing but debt and a pathetic history. "You were charity, Ariana. I married you for the cover, not for love." The words landed like fists. Before we dive into how the trap was set, if you want to see how Ariana completely destroyed her husband, reclaimed everything he stole, and walked out of this story victorious, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling us what time it is where you're watching from. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Ariana stumbled back, her bare feet slipping on the wet stone. She caught herself, adjusted the twins, and forced herself to breathe. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "When they think you're broken, that's when you watch. That's when you learn. That's when you prepare." "Fine," Ariana's voice steadied. "I'll go." She turned and walked down the steps, the agony in her body measured with every step. Behind her, she heard Sarah's high, cruel laugh. The door closed. The light stayed on. Ariana reached the iron gate and stopped. The street stretched out before her, empty and dark. The rain poured harder. She collapsed onto the curb, rocking her babies gently. "Mama's got you. Mama's got you." A moment later, the silent, sleek, black Rolls-Royce pulled up. The window descended slowly, revealing the face of David Mitchell. He was impeccably dressed, looking like he owned every inch of the street they were on. "Don't worry about them, cuz," David said, his voice deep and calm, the complete opposite of Robert's screaming contempt. "Your mother and I were ready for this. You're going home, and we're going to bankrupt your husband before breakfast." David opened the door to the warmth of the car. Ariana looked at the mansion one last time, then back at her cousin, the only family left. She stood, secured the twins, and stepped into the black car, leaving the broken, betrayed Ariana behind. The new one was ready for war. The Rolls-Royce's interior was an oasis of silent, supple leather, a world away from the biting wind and the cold marble steps Ariana had just abandoned. The moment she settled in, still clutching her newborns, David's driver, a mountain of a man named Ben, gently raised the privacy screen, sealing them off from the rain-swept street where Robert's opulent house sat like a fading monument to betrayal. Ariana couldn't speak. She could only stare at the man across from her, David Mitchell, her cousin, whom she'd pictured in her mind as the earnest, slightly awkward teenager who used to visit their mother every summer. The man before her now was a masterpiece of controlled power. His suit was bespoke, his posture impeccable, and his expression was one of intense, calculated disappointment. Not in her, but in the situation. His deep, dark eyes, so similar to her own, held a cold, unwavering clarity. "I apologize for the dramatics, Ariana," David finally said, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "But time was critical, and frankly, I wanted him to see the car. I wanted him to know, even if he didn't understand yet, that his world was about to end." Ariana could only shake her head, trying to process the impossible. "David, you look different. They said, the family told me you moved to the coast for a small business, that you were struggling." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed David's face before he masked it. That was the cover story, Ariana. The necessary fiction. He leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "The small business is Mitchell Global Tech. And I haven't been struggling since I sold my first major application at 22. He paused, letting the weight of the name hang in the air. "I'm a global tech billionaire, cuz. I've been building this empire for the last 15 years. And your mother, my Aunt Maya, was my silent partner and legal strategist until she passed." The truth hit Ariana with the force of a physical blow. Her mother, the woman Robert had mocked for her simple life, was the co-founder of this secret fortune. "Why the secrecy?" Ariana whispered, tears finally tracing paths through the grime on her face. "Why let me marry him? Why let me suffer?" David's expression softened, laced with genuine regret. "That was your mother's final instruction, and my greatest regret. After Robert proposed, Aunt Maya and I had a meeting. She saw the predator in him, the contempt he held for our family. She knew he would try to use you, but she insisted you had to choose him freely, and she insisted the trap be laid before you said, 'I do.'" He explained that her mother had found legal loopholes, securing ownership of the Campbells' alleged assets before the wedding. She said if he was going to betray you, the betrayal had to happen under our roof, on our terms. It was the only way to ensure the contracts were watertight, and that you would have irrefutable cause for divorce, full custody, and total asset seizure. David reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew a heavy leather document holder. "Ariana, I have failed you in one thing. I lost touch when you needed me most. I was monitoring the accounts, but I didn't intervene fast enough when the twins were born. For that, I am truly sorry." He placed the holder gently on the seat beside her. "But that ends now. We are going to a place where you will be safe. Tomorrow, we meet the legal team. We will ensure Robert Campbell doesn't just lose his money. He loses his name, his business, and any legal right to be near those children again. Everything he thought he stole, we are taking back. We were always ready." The next morning, Ariana sat in a sun-drenched, soundproof meeting room high above the city. The soft purr of the twins sleeping in a nearby bassinet, the only sound of comfort. Across the glass-topped table sat David, looking calm and formidable, and next to him, a woman introduced simply as Ms. Hayes, a senior partner from a firm whose name Ariana vaguely recognized as being synonymous with generational wealth and impenetrable legal defense. Ms. Hayes was Ariana's mother's attorney, the architect of the very trap Robert had just stumbled into. Ms. Hayes did not offer condolences or small talk. She simply opened a binder thick enough to hold years of financial history and began to speak with the efficient, clinical precision of a surgeon. "Ariana, your mother, Maya Mitchell, was not merely a good homemaker, as Robert often suggested. She was one of the most brilliant legal minds I have ever worked with, specializing in proprietary trust law. Before she passed, and specifically after Robert Campbell proposed, she and David established a complex structure known as the Mitchell Legacy Trust." Ariana stared at the documents, her heart pounding. The truth was heavier than the twins in her arms. "When Robert married you," Ms. Hayes continued, her voice level, "he believed he was marrying into a family with no money and no resources, making you an easy divorce target he could control. He failed to run proper due diligence because he was blinded by his own arrogance and his assessment of your skin color and apparent social standing. What he married was an illusion carefully constructed by your mother." Then came the true bomb blast. Robert Campbell's entire venture capital firm, Campbell Group, was essentially a shell. 6 months before your wedding, David, acting as an anonymous seed investor, injected the funds necessary to start the firm. The capital Robert claimed came from his family and his genius. That funding was structured as a zero-interest, long-term convertible debt held by the trust. Every client, every project, every dollar Robert leveraged was built on our foundation. He was essentially a well-paid CEO of a company he never truly owned, operating with David's money. Ariana gasped, clutching her fists. Robert hadn't just used her. He was a puppet dancing on her family's strings. Ms. Hayes flipped a page. Furthermore, the mansion, the cars, the bulk of the art collection, all those assets Robert loudly claimed as his, were placed into the trust years ago as part of your mother's inheritance plan for you. Robert signed off on every deed transfer, oblivious, because the documents were buried deep within the prenuptial agreements he barely skimmed, under the assumption they were just standard legal protection for his vast, imaginary wealth. David leaned across the table, his earlier regret replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. "It was the only way, cuz. Your mother knew Robert's greed would make him reckless. She built an iron cage around your future and handed me the keys. He thought he kicked you out of his life, but he just left the front door of your house unguarded and walked straight into a cage of debt he can never escape." Ariana finally understood the depth of the betrayal, but more powerfully, the depth of her mother's foresight and love. It wasn't just a trust. It was a testament to a mother's fierce, intelligent protection of her daughter. She had not been left with nothing. She had been handed the entire chessboard, loaded with devastating legal ammunition, just waiting for the signal to fire. The humiliation of the previous night had been the price of admission to her true destiny. Ms. Hayes slid a second binder across the table, this one thinner, black, and marked with a single, ominous label: Campbell. If the first binder had detailed the cage, this one contained the sharpened knives. Ariana hesitated before touching it. This wasn't about property deeds or trust documents. This was the ugly, intimate record of 6 years of calculated malice. This is the comprehensive dossier on Robert Campbell, Ms. Hayes explained, her voice entirely devoid of judgment. It spans from the day he met you to the moment he signed the eviction notice. Your mother insisted on professional surveillance from the moment he proposed. She believed that a man who plots financially will plot personally. Ariana opened the binder. The first section was dedicated to Sarah, his fiancée. It wasn't just a record of their affair. It was a meticulous timeline of their joint fraud. There were time-stamped emails showing Sarah accessing Campbell Group accounts, transferring small but significant sums over a period of 2 years, and depositing them into shell accounts. There were transcripts of coded messages discussing the date of Robert's planned divorce filing, and how they would split the assets they believed they would claim from Ariana. Ariana felt a cold, dull shock replace the fire of her anger. She wasn't dealing with a husband who simply fell out of love. She was dealing with 2 sophisticated, long-term criminals. Robert hadn't just kicked her out. He had actively stolen from her inheritance while she was carrying his children. The racial contempt he'd shown now made sickening sense. He thought she was too poor and too stupid to ever detect his scheme. David, watching her face intently, spoke softly. He didn't respect you enough to be honest, even in his cruelty. That's the real insult, cuz. The next section detailed Robert's professional fraud. The Campbell Group wasn't just funded by David's trust. Robert had been systematically defrauding his own clients, using David's seed money as a shield. The dossier contained recorded phone calls, disguised as business updates, which were actually evidence of illegal investment practices. David's team had anticipated the financial fallout, and already had the entire company ready to be transferred to the trust, saving the clients and exposing Robert to immediate civil and potential criminal liability. The evidence is irrefutable, Ms. Hayes confirmed. We have the documentation for immediate asset seizure, eviction, and full custody. We can petition the court tomorrow, but that would be a simple divorce. It gives him the chance to regroup, hire expensive lawyers, and delay the finality. Ariana looked up, her eyes hard. What is the alternative? Patience, David replied, leaning forward. Justice, not speed. We let him enjoy his victory for a few more weeks. We let him spend money he thinks is his. We let him boast to his friends and clients. We let him think he got away with humiliating a black woman in front of his entire neighborhood. He paused, letting the strategic necessity of the waiting period sink in. We need to weaponize his arrogance. Every day he stays in that house and spends that money is a day he digs his own financial grave deeper. When we move, it won't just be a legal filing, it will be an execution. A public, total humiliation that ensures he never rises again. It ensures he never tries to claim those babies. Ariana slowly closed the binder, the black leather cold against her palm. Her mother's lesson echoed again. When they think you're broken, that's when you watch. She looked at David, then at Ms. Hayes, a woman she'd known for less than 24 hours, but who represented the unwavering love of her mother. The anger was gone. In its place was a chilling, quiet resolution. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was executing a final, precise act of justice. The next 4 weeks were the longest of Ariana's life. They were a study in contrast. The frantic chaos of the eviction night replaced by the gilded, almost unnatural calm of David's penthouse, and the searing rage she felt replaced by the cold steel of patience. David had moved them into a discreet, sprawling apartment that overlooked the vast, indifferent expanse of the city, a place designed to make the outside world, and Robert Campbell, feel small and irrelevant. Ariana committed entirely to the plan, understanding that the delay was the most crucial weapon they possessed. Every morning, she would spend hours in the makeshift nursery with her twins, pouring all her fear and love into them. It was their small, silent sanctuary. In the afternoons, she would meet with Ms. Hayes, not to rehash the trauma, but to analyze Robert's moves. The lawyers called this phase documentation and complacency. To Robert, he had won. He had successfully discarded his inconvenient wife and the twin burdens, and now he was free to install Sarah, his real partner, into the mansion. And Robert, true to David's prediction, was arrogant enough to gloat. Ariana didn't have to seek out his humiliation. It was brought to her on a silver platter in the form of David's dedicated monitoring team. The social media surveillance reports were brutal. There were high-resolution photographs of Robert and Sarah hosting lavish parties in the very rooms Ariana had decorated, drinking champagne from crystal glasses that were legally hers. There were Instagram stories of Robert posing in the garage with his sports car, a car the Mitchell Legacy Trust had bought, titled, and leased to Campbell Group. The worst was the public narrative Robert spun. He gave an interview to a local business column subtly hinting that Ariana was mentally unstable and had been incapable of handling the responsibilities of motherhood and his lifestyle, thus forcing his hand. He painted himself as the long-suffering victim who had to protect his assets from a reckless spouse. Each piece of documentation, each photo of Sarah laughing in her kitchen, each quote of Robert lying about her state, was a fresh, painful insult. But David and Ms. Hayes drilled one concept into her. Every move he made was leverage. Every dollar he spent on those parties was a dollar he would never see again. Every false word he spoke was proof of defamation that would be used against him in court. Ariana learned to compartmentalize the pain, folding the raw emotion away and replacing it with strategic thought. She would look at a picture of Robert toasting Sarah, not with anger, but with the chilling thought, how much did that champagne cost? Because I own the vineyard it came from. See, cuz, David had remarked one afternoon, pointing to a photo of Robert boasting about a major new investment. He's doing our job for us. He's celebrating on borrowed time, on borrowed assets, thinking we're still fighting for scraps. When he finally sees us, he won't just be surprised. He'll be paralyzed. For weeks of watching, waiting, and healing hardened Ariana from the wounded wife into the meticulous executioner her mother had trained her to be. The love and protection she felt for her twins transformed her quiet resolve into an unbreakable shell. She was ready to move out of the silence and safety of the penthouse and back into the battlefield, not as the victim Robert threw out, but as the owner coming to reclaim what was hers. The waiting was over. The morning they left the penthouse felt less like a departure and more like the deployment of a highly trained unit. The sun was sharp and cold, a stark contrast to the emotional warmth that now encased Ariana. She wasn't wearing her hospital gown or a borrowed robe. She was dressed in a tailored, obsidian-colored suit, chosen by David's personal stylist. It was a garment that didn't just fit her body, but also the cold, resolute purpose in her eyes. The twins, nestled securely with a specialized nanny in a separate vehicle, were the silent, protected core of the entire operation. Ariana sat beside David in the lead SUV, the tinted windows shielding them from the world. Behind them followed Ms. Hayes, 2 junior legal partners, and 2 plainclothes officers, men who were there not for protection, but for the enforcement of the law. The convoy was small, precise, and utterly unavoidable. David's hand rested on the center console. He didn't look at her, but straight ahead, his profile as sharp and unyielding as granite. "This is it, cuz. You've mastered the waiting. Now comes the execution." Ariana nodded, the sound of her breath surprisingly even. The fear that had been her constant companion for 4 weeks had evaporated, replaced by the strategic calm David had cultivated. "What's the final sequence?" David leaned slightly closer, his briefing as concise as a military directive. "The objective is not just to file papers, but to secure the physical assets and create a public spectacle that guarantees no further recourse for Robert. The first SUV, the one with the officers, will secure the perimeter. They have the eviction order. As soon as we enter the gate, Robert Campbell and Sarah are legally trespassing on trust property." He pointed to a tablet displaying a live financial dashboard. Simultaneously, Ms. Hayes is hitting the buttons. Every liquid asset under the Campbell Group umbrella, every personal investment Robert made using trust seed money, every account he's drained over the last month. It all gets frozen, seized, or transferred back to you. By the time he opens the door, the only thing he'll truly own is the suit on his back. "And the public narrative?" Ariana asked. This was the part she craved, the obliteration of the lie he'd told the world. The public expose hits 30 minutes after the seizure. David Global Tech, my main company, is releasing an official statement detailing Robert's financial fraud, his misuse of investor funds, and the legal framework of the Mitchell Legacy Trust. His clients will know he was operating a shell game with your mother's money. His social circle will know he was thrown out by the black wife he despised. The humiliation will be total and absolute. Ariana looked down at her hands. They weren't trembling. They were steady, ready to sign the papers that would end Robert's life as he knew it. She realized David and her mother hadn't just prepared a legal defense. They had prepared her. They had given her the time to heal, to find her cold resolve, and to understand that this wasn't revenge. It was simply the enforcement of justice. As the convoy turned onto the familiar, tree-lined street, the mansion came into view. It stood exactly as she remembered it, imposing, warm, and untouchable. But this time, the light that glowed in the windows felt less like a memory, and more like a sign of the trespassers inside. "Remember what you are doing, Ariana," David said, his voice dropping low. "You are not walking back in as his wife. You are walking in as the CEO, the owner, the creditor, and the protector of the Mitchell legacy. That house belongs to the babies now." The lead vehicle signaled. The iron gate of the mansion, the gate Robert had slammed in her face, hissed open, welcoming the convoy in. The game had truly begun. The convoy stopped on the wide, circular drive of the mansion. The uniformed officers were the first to move, securing the entrances and ensuring the security system was disabled, all within moments. Ariana and David exited the lead SUV and walked toward the imposing front door, which was flung open before they reached it. Robert Campbell stood there, not alone, but flanked by Sarah. They were dressed in expensive athleisure where, looking relaxed and entitled, clearly interrupted mid-morning coffee. Robert's face, initially set in a look of annoyed privilege, contorted into disbelief, then cold rage, upon seeing Ariana. "You! How dare you trespass? I told you, I'll call security. They have a restraining order ready to file." He stopped dead when his eyes slid past Ariana and landed on David Mitchell. David stood a few feet behind Ariana, an imposing presence whose tailored suit and expression of calm authority radiated more wealth than Robert had ever genuinely possessed. "I am the one you should be calling the police on, Robert," Ariana said, her voice steady and low. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him since he had thrown her out, and the sound of her control was a psychological blow. "Who the hell is this?" Robert sneered, turning his attention to David. "Another pathetic cousin come begging for a handout?" David Mitchell stepped forward, effortlessly claiming the space Robert thought was his. He offered no greeting, only a lethal formality. "Mr. Campbell, my name is David Mitchell. I am the sole executor and primary creditor of the Mitchell Legacy Trust. I am also the cousin of Ariana Mitchell." The color drained instantly from Robert's face. He knew the name Mitchell only as the family of the woman he considered a charity case. He certainly didn't know the name David Mitchell was synonymous with billions in global tech. His eyes darted nervously between David's unwavering stare and the sleek black cars now parked on the perimeter. "This is absurd. Get off my property," Robert shouted, the controls slipping, his voice rising in panic. Before Robert could finish, Ms. Hayes, stepping up with the efficiency of a silent assassin, thrust 2 thick stacks of legal documents into Robert's chest. "Robert Campbell, you are hereby served with an immediate eviction notice and cease and desist orders concerning all liquid assets and proprietary information related to the Campbell Group. The venture capital firm is now under the interim administration of the Mitchell Trust. Furthermore, you are officially restricted from accessing any accounts associated with this property, effective 30 seconds ago." As Robert stumbled back, dropping the papers, his mind racing to the safe, Ms. Hayes turned to Sarah. "Sarah, you are hereby served with documents detailing civil proceedings for embezzlement and corporate fraud committed against the Mitchell Legacy Trust. We recommend you retain counsel immediately." Sarah let out a small, terrified squeak and backed into the foyer. Robert, his face a mask of sweating confusion, pointed a shaking finger at David. "That's impossible. This mansion, the firm, it's mine. My lawyers vetted everything. Who the hell are you?" David delivered the final, crushing truth, his voice slicing through the frantic silence. "I am the investor, Robert. I am the man who funded your entire career through the trust. The house belongs to the trust. The firm belongs to the trust. Every dollar you spent on these parties, every penny you took, was our family's money that you were borrowing. You have been living a lie, renting a life, and enjoying the privileges of a wealth you never earned, all provided by the black family you despised. By kicking out my cousin, you simply evicted yourself. The only thing you own right now, Mr. Campbell, is the debt of the last 4 weeks' worth of misappropriated spending." The officers, having received a silent signal, began moving, securing the property. Robert staggered back against the wall, eyes wide, the reality of total financial collapse physically crushing him. His life was a shell, and the shell had just been cracked wide open by the woman he had discarded like trash for weeks ago. The sound of his frantic, desperate gasp was the sound of his entire world shattering. The confrontation in the mansion's foyer had been the climax of Robert's financial ruin, but the war for Ariana's dignity and the twins' custody required one final, precise strike. 2 days after the eviction, Ariana, now legally occupying the home, called Robert and requested a private, neutral meeting to discuss a custody arrangement. The location was a tastefully appointed, soundproof conference room at Ms. Hayes's legal offices. The setting was clinical, designed to foster a sense of false security. Robert arrived alone, looking significantly less polished than he had 2 days prior. The suit was wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed, and the utter humiliation of his public downfall was etched into his posture. He was angry, defeated, but crucially, he was still arrogant. He believed he held the final piece of leverage, his biological claim to the children. Ariana sat across the table, composed and entirely still. David and Ms. Hayes were intentionally absent, making Robert feel that this was his chance to negotiate with the weak link. "I'm glad you finally came to your senses, Ariana," Robert began, pushing a small, handwritten document toward her, a ridiculously biased custody proposal. "You have no idea how brutal the family court system is. You're unemployed, suddenly wealthy, and I have a clear history of business leadership. You may have won the house, but I'll win the twins. You need me to be reasonable." Ariana didn't touch the paper. She just watched him, the quiet hum of the room masking the tiny, nearly invisible microphone hidden beneath the flower arrangement on the table, a device controlled by David in a nearby office. "I only want what is fair, Robert," Ariana replied, her voice soft and measured, inviting him into the trap. "I want to know why. Why the cruelty? If you wanted a divorce, why throw me out 3 days after I gave birth? Why the public humiliation, the lies about my family? You risked everything, and I want to know what the ultimate goal was." The question touched Robert's core narcissism. He needed to explain his superiority. He needed the final victory of his narrative. He smirked, leaning in conspiratorially. "The divorce was always the plan, Ariana. The moment I met Sarah, the timeline was accelerated. I needed the cruelty, because you needed to be broken. You were useless. Your family provided no social ladder, only a convenient cover story for my real investments. I married you out of pity, to secure my position in the social world as a stable family man before the big move." He spat out the last words, as if the memory of their marriage was bile. He tapped the custody proposal. "And the twins? They are the ultimate asset. You have the money, but I have the bloodline. They guarantee me a decade of child support, a huge alimony settlement down the road, and they keep me tied to the Mitchell Trust's deep pockets if you ever need help. They're collateral, Ariana. That's what they are." Ariana felt a spike of searing hatred, but she held the rage in check. She maintained her calm, asking the final, critical question. "So, you married me for pity, used my family's money, and you view your own children merely as financial leverage?" "Exactly," Robert chuckled, settling back in his chair, believing he had intimidated her into submission. "You finally get it. You were the stepping stone, and the twins are the pension fund. Just sign the agreement, and we can make this easy." Ariana slowly pushed her chair back and rose, retrieving a sleek, modern device from her suit jacket pocket. She looked him straight in the eye, the fire he'd expected 4 weeks ago finally burning cold and bright. "Thank you, Robert," she said, her voice now hard as ice. You just confirmed everything, Ms. Hayes, and I needed to hear. That entire conversation was recorded, and that confession of viewing your children as collateral is the final piece of evidence we needed to secure full, unrestricted custody. You will have no access, no visitation, and no financial claim to those babies, ever. Robert's jaw dropped. He lunged across the table, shouting obscenities, but the door instantly opened, and David walked in, flanked by 2 security personnel. The triumphant villain was instantly revealed as a trapped, screaming child. Robert was escorted out, defeated entirely. The final recording had secured the only thing that truly mattered: the complete protection of her children. Robert Campbell's ruin was swift and total. The final recording, coupled with the meticulous financial dossier, left him without a legal leg to stand on. He was granted supervised, short-term visitation rights with his children only until the final divorce decree, a formality that stripped him of all parental rights and financial claim to the twins, based on his confession of viewing them as collateral. Professionally, the public expose by David Global Tech saw his former clients flee, his business partners demand investigations, and his name becomes synonymous with fraud and racial arrogance. Sarah, facing civil lawsuits for embezzlement, vanished quietly from the public eye. Ariana never wasted a moment celebrating the destruction. For her, the victory wasn't the fall of Robert, but the security of her children and the quiet reclamation of her dignity. The mansion, now officially and unequivocally hers, felt different. It was no longer a stage for Robert's false success, but a sanctuary built on the foresight of her mother, Maya Mitchell. Her first act was deeply personal. She had the massive, wrought-iron gates, once slammed in her face, replaced with a subtle bronze plaque bearing her mother's name. The property was renamed the Maya Mitchell Estate, a tribute that served as a constant reminder that love and intelligence had always been her true foundation. With the legal battle settled, Ariana focused on translating her experience into purpose. She worked closely with David and Ms. Hayes to establish the Mitchell Legacy Foundation for financial empowerment. The mission was clear: to provide legal and financial resources, surveillance expertise, and safe housing for women, particularly women of color, who were trapped in marriages or relationships with partners motivated by financial opportunism and deceit. "We don't just want to help them leave," Ariana explained to David one evening, standing in the mansion's newly repurposed study. "We want to teach them to watch, to document, and to prepare, just like Mom taught us." David, having fulfilled his promise to his aunt, found a renewed pride in his wealth, seeing it actively serving justice. He invested a significant portion of the trust's recovered assets into the foundation, ensuring its perpetuity. "This isn't revenge, Ariana," he noted, watching her sign paperwork with the same focused intensity her mother possessed. "It's building a blueprint for dignity. You took a moment of complete humiliation and turned it into an institution." Ariana stepped away from the desk and walked toward the window, looking out over the expansive, quiet grounds. She had been thrown out here, barefoot, bleeding, and believing she was worthless. Now, she was the undisputed owner of everything Robert had craved, but more importantly, she owned herself. She had transformed from the naive, trusting wife into a composed, powerful woman of purpose. She found quiet satisfaction not in the opulence, but in the small, meaningful details. The twins sleeping soundly in the nursery, the security system she oversaw herself, The daily calls from Ms. Hayes discussing a new legal strategy for a woman in need. Her humiliation had become her strength, the public nature of Robert's betrayal fueling a desire to protect others from that same pain. She had turned a tragic narrative of being thrown out into a lasting legacy of triumph, ensuring that the next generation of women, including her own daughters, would never have to be victims of a man's calculated greed.